The piercing wail of Officer Jake Thompson's radio cut through the silence of his patrol car. Like a knife at exactly 3:17 a.m. on what would become the most haunting night of his 12-year career, the December wind howled across the desolate Colorado mountains, rattling his windows as snowflakes danced in his headlight beams like ghostly apparitions. Jake had been nursing his third cup of coffee, fighting off the familiar drowsiness that came with the graveyard shift when the dispatcher's voice crackled through with an urgency that immediately sent adrenaline coursing through his veins. Unit 47, we have a possible 10 to 50 on Highway 185, mile marker 73. Trucker reports fresh skid marks. Debris field, but no visible vehicle, requesting immediate response. Jake's weathered hands tightened on the steering wheel as he processed the information, a 10 to 50-minute traffic accident, but the details didn't add up. Fresh skid marks with no vehicle usually meant one of two things. Either someone had managed to drive away from what should have been a serious crash, or a vehicle had gone over one of the many treacherous cliff edges that lined this particular stretch of mountain highway. Neither scenario was good, but the second possibility made his blood run cold. Highway 185 through the Sangre de Cristo Mountains was notorious among local law enforcement. The winding road carved through some of the most unforgiving terrain in Colorado, with sheer drops that plunged hundreds of feet into rocky chasms below. In winter, black ice formed without warning, and the combination of steep grades, sharp curves, and weather conditions had claimed dozens of lives over the years. Jake had worked too many recovery operations in those canyons, pulling mangled vehicles and broken bodies from places that seemed impossible to reach. 10 to 4 dispatch, Unit 47 responding. Jake radioed back, already hitting his emergency lights and pressing the accelerator. His patrol car lurched forward into the night, tires gripping the snow-covered asphalt as he navigated the familiar but dangerous curves. Beside him in the passenger seat, his partner stirred from sleep, not a human partner, but Zeus, a 3-year-old bloodhound whose reputation for finding the unfindable had become legendary throughout the department. Zeus was no ordinary police dog, standing nearly 30 inches at the shoulder with a muscular build and distinctive wrinkled face. He possessed what seemed like supernatural tracking abilities. His nose contained over 300 million scent receptors compared to a human's mere 6 million, and his brain devoted nearly 40% of its processing power to analyzing smells. In his 3 years of service, Zeus had located missing hikers in blizzard conditions, tracked suspects through urban mazes, and found evidence that human investigators had completely overlooked. Most remarkably, he had never failed to find what he was looking for, a perfect success record that had made him something of a celebrity among search and rescue teams across the state. As Jake's patrol car climbed higher into the mountains, the temperature gauge showed a bone-chilling -15 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of cold that could kill an injured person in minutes, turning any rescue operation into a race against time. Zeus seemed to sense the urgency, lifting his massive head and looking out the window with alert, intelligent eyes that reflected the dashboard lights. The dog's thick coat was built for cold weather, but Jake knew that even Zeus would struggle in these conditions. If they had to conduct an extended search, the radio crackled again with an update from dispatch. Unit 47, be advised, reporting. Party states debris field extends approximately to 100 feet along the highway. Multiple glass fragments and what appears to be automotive fluid on the roadway. No response to attempts to contact potential victims via cell phone ping in the area. Jake's jaw clenched as he processed this new information. A 200-foot debris field suggested high-speed impact, and the lack of cell phone response could mean either no survivors or victims who were unconscious or worse. He'd seen enough accidents to know that time was the critical factor. In these temperatures, hypothermia could set in within minutes for someone who was injured and exposed to the elements. The landscape around them grew increasingly desolate as they climbed higher. Towering pine trees lined both sides of the highway, their branches heavy with snow that occasionally crashed down onto the road with thunderous impacts. The guardrails, where they existed, seemed pathetically inadequate to stop a vehicle traveling at highway speeds. Jake had always wondered why the state hadn't installed better barriers along these sections, but budget constraints and the sheer scope of the mountain highway system made comprehensive safety improvements nearly impossible. As they approached mile marker 73, Jake's headlights illuminated the aftermath of what was clearly a violent accident. Broken glass sparkled like diamonds across the black asphalt, and long, Dark skid marks told the story of a driver desperately trying to regain control. The guardrail on the right side of the highway was completely destroyed. Twisted metal posts jutting up at odd angles like broken teeth. Beyond the shattered barrier, Jake's headlight beams disappeared into an abyss of darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. Zeus was now fully alert, his nose working as he caught scents carried on the frigid mountain air. The dog's body language had shifted into what Jake recognized as his working mode, ears forward, muscles tensed, every sense focused on the task ahead. Even through the closed windows of the patrol car, Zeus was picking up information that would be crucial to whatever they were about to discover. Jake pulled his patrol car to a stop near the debris field and grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight, radio, and emergency kit. The moment he opened the car door, the brutal cold hit him like a physical blow, and he could feel the moisture in his nostrils beginning to freeze. Zeus bounded out beside him, immediately beginning to work the scent patterns with the methodical precision that had made him famous among search and rescue teams. Standing at the edge of the destroyed guardrail, Jake aimed his flashlight beam into the canyon below. The light revealed a steep, rocky slope covered in snow and dotted with massive pine trees. Somewhere down there, in that frozen wilderness, answers waited. But as Zeus began pulling toward a barely visible path leading down into the abyss, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to discover something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about human nature, and the lengths people would go to protect the innocent. The wind picked up, howling through the pine trees with a sound like voices calling from the darkness below. Zeus looked up at his partner with eyes that seemed to say, "Are you ready for this?" Jake checked his radio one more time, took a deep breath of the knife-sharp air, and followed his four-legged partner into the unknown. Jake's breath formed crystalline clouds in the sub-zero air. As he carefully examined the catastrophic scene before him, his high-powered LED flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a horrifying tableau of destruction that spoke of violence and speed. The guardrail hadn't just been damaged, it had been obliterated. Thick steel posts, designed to withstand tremendous impact, had been snapped clean in half, their jagged ends jutting skyward like metallic grave markers. The twisted remnants of the barrier hung at impossible angles, some pieces flung so far from the original structure that Jake had to search for them among the pine trees. On the opposite side of the highway dot, the tire tracks told their own chilling story. Jake knelt beside the longest skid mark, running his gloved hand just above the burned rubber streak that stretched nearly 150 feet along the asphalt. These weren't the controlled marks of someone gradually applying brakes, they were the desperate panic gouges left by a driver who had suddenly realized they were about to die. The tracks showed the vehicle had been traveling in the right lane when something went catastrophically wrong. Perhaps black ice, mechanical failure, or driver fatigue had caused the initial loss of control. But what followed was pure physics and terror. Zeus worked methodically around the debris field, his massive head low to the ground as his extraordinary nose processed layers of scent information invisible to human senses. The bloodhound's behavior was different tonight, more intense, more focused than Jake had ever seen him. Zeus's tail remained rigid, a sure sign that he was tracking something significant, and his periodic soft whines indicated whatever he was following was recent, probably within the last few hours. Jake's flashlight beam swept across the scattered wreckage, cataloging each piece of evidence. Chunks of automotive glass sparkled like deadly confetti across a 100-yard stretch of highway. Most were safety glass fragments, the kind designed to crumble rather than create razor-sharp shards. But their sheer volume suggested multiple windows had been destroyed on impact. Mixed among the glass were pieces of twisted chrome, fragments of plastic trim, and what appeared to be sections of a vehicle's grille, all indicating a large SUV or truck had been involved. The most disturbing discovery was the automotive fluid Jake found pooling beneath the snow. His flashlight revealed multiple dark stains that could be oil, transmission fluid, or brake fluid, all suggesting catastrophic mechanical damage. But when he knelt closer, the metallic scent that reached his nostrils made his stomach lurch. Blood, not just a few drops from minor cuts, but enough to indicate serious injury. The crimson stains formed a trail leading directly to the destroyed guardrail, then disappeared over the edge into the black void below. Zeus had moved to the cliff's edge and was now staring down into the canyon with an intensity that made the hair on Jake's neck stand up. The dog's body language screamed urgency, but also something else: confusion, perhaps even distress. In all their years working together, Jake had never seen Zeus react this way to a scent trail. Usually, the bloodhound would immediately begin following whatever trail he'd picked up. But tonight, he seemed almost reluctant to proceed. As if what lay ahead defied his understanding of how things should be, Jake joined his partner at the precipice and aimed his flashlight down into the abyss. The beam revealed a nightmare landscape of jagged granite outcroppings, massive boulders, and dense stands of pine trees whose branches created an impenetrable canopy of shadows. The slope was steep, at least 60 degrees in some places, and covered with loose scree that would be treacherous even in daylight. In these conditions, with ice coating every surface, it would be like descending into hell itself. But Zeus had found something down there. The dog's nose never lied, and his track record spoke for itself. If Zeus said someone was in that canyon, then someone was in that canyon, dead or alive. Jake radio dispatched to request additional units and search and rescue backup, but he knew that in these weather conditions, it could be hours before help arrived. Hours that anyone trapped below couldn't afford to wait. As Jake prepared his rescue gear rope, first aid kit, emergency blankets, and flares, he noticed something that made his blood run even colder. The snow around the broken guardrail showed footprints, human footprints, but not the kind you'd expect from accident victims seeking help. These prints were small, child-sized, and they led away from the crash site before circling back and disappearing over the edge. Either children had been involved in this accident, or someone very small had witnessed it and tried to help. Zeus began his descent without waiting for Jake's command, picking his way down a narrow game trail that seemed to materialize out of the rock face itself. The bloodhound's paws found purchase on surfaces that looked impossible to navigate, his powerful hindquarters propelling him forward with surprising grace for such a large animal. Jake had no choice but to follow, using his flashlight to illuminate each step as he worked his way down the treacherous slope. The temperature seemed to drop even further as they descended, and Jake could feel the cold seeping through his heavy winter jacket. His breath came in shorter puffs as the thin mountain air and physical exertion took their toll. Behind him, the lights of his patrol car grew smaller and smaller until they were just pinpricks in the darkness above. Ahead, Zeus moved like a ghost through the shadows, occasionally stopping to confirm the scent trail before continuing deeper into the canyon. 20 minutes into their descent, Jake's legs were burning from the constant strain of maintaining balance on the icy terrain. His flashlight beam had revealed the more concerning pieces of evidence, fresh gouges in tree bark, where something large and metallic had scraped past, and what appeared to be strips of automotive weather stripping caught on low-hanging branches. The vehicle, whatever it was, had definitely come this way, probably tumbling and bouncing off obstacles as it fell. Zeus suddenly froze, his ears pricked forward, and his entire body trembling with excitement or alarm. The dog looked back at Jake with an expression that seemed almost human in its complexity, part urgency, part confusion, part something that looked uncomfortably like fear. Then Zeus threw back his head and released a howl that echoed off the canyon walls, like a banshee's wail, a sound Jake had never heard his partner make in 3 years of working together. As the howl faded into silence, Jake heard something that made his heart stop. From somewhere in the darkness ahead came a sound so faint he almost missed it. The tinkling melody of a car radio still playing, its signal somehow reaching into this frozen wilderness. Someone's vehicle was down there, and incredibly, impossibly, it still had power. Zeus had found what they were looking for. But as Jake followed his partner toward that ghostly music, he couldn't shake the feeling that what they were about to discover would challenge everything he thought he knew about survival, sacrifice, and the mysterious ways people could vanish without a trace. The haunting melody of what sounded like a classical music station drifted through the frozen air, creating a surreal soundtrack to their descent into the canyon's depths. Jake's flashlight beam danced across the treacherous terrain as he followed Zeus deeper into what felt like another world entirely. The bloodhound moved with supernatural precision, his paws finding grip on surfaces that looked impossible to navigate, his massive frame somehow flowing through gaps between boulders that seemed to narrow for his bulk. 30 minutes had passed since they'd begun their descent, and Jake's muscles screamed in protest. The rocky slope had given way to a more gradual decline, but the footing had become exponentially more dangerous. A thin layer of ice coated everything: rocks, fallen logs, even the pine needles beneath their feet, creating a skating rink disguised as wilderness. Jake had already slipped twice, catching himself at the last second before tumbling into crevices that his flashlight couldn't find the bottom of. The temperature had plummeted even further as they descended, and Jake estimated it was now approaching minus 20 degrees. At these temperatures, exposed skin could develop frostbite in minutes, and he could feel his face beginning to numb despite his insulated balaclava. His breath formed instant ice crystals that fell like tiny diamonds with each exhalation, and the metal parts of his equipment had become painful to touch even through his insulated gloves. Zeus suddenly veered left, following what appeared to be a dry creek bed carved between massive granite formations. The music was getting louder now, definitely coming from somewhere ahead, but there was something wrong with it. The melody kept skipping, repeating the same few bars over and over again, as if the radio was damaged or running on failing power. Mixed with the music, Jake began to detect other sounds that made his pulse quicken: the rhythmic ticking of a cooling engine, the soft hiss of escaping steam, and what might have been the creak of settling metal. The creek bed widened into a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees, their snow-laden branches creating a natural cathedral of shadows and silence. Jake's flashlight beam swept across the space and immediately locked onto something that defied belief. A dark blue SUV sat wrapped around the massive trunk of an ancient pine tree, its front end accordion folded into something barely recognizable as having once been an automobile. The vehicle had struck the tree with such tremendous force that the trunk, easily 4 feet in diameter, had actually bent backward several degrees. The SUV's hood had been driven back into the passenger compartment, and the entire front half of the vehicle had compressed into a space that couldn't have been more than 2 feet deep. Steam still rose from the wreckage, creating ghostly wisps in the frigid air, and Jake could smell the acrid mixture of antifreeze, oil, and hot metal that always accompanied fresh automotive carnage. But what transfixed Jake wasn't the destruction, it was the impossible fact that the SUV's headlights were still functioning, casting eerie beams through the forest that created dancing shadows among the trees. The radio continued its damaged loop of classical music, the sound now clearly emanating from speakers that had somehow survived the catastrophic impact. Most incredibly of all, Jake could see that the engine was still running, its idle rough and irregular, but unmistakably alive. Zeus had moved beyond the wreckage and was now circling an area roughly 50 feet from the crashed SUV, his behavior even more agitated than before. The bloodhound kept returning to a spot near a cluster of large boulders, pawing at the snow and whimpering in a way that made Jake's skin crawl. It was a sound of distress, confusion, and something that seemed almost like mourning, as if Zeus had found something that challenged his understanding of the natural order. Jake approached the SUV cautiously, his service weapon drawn, but held low. The scene felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. Vehicles didn't keep running after impacts like this. Electrical systems didn't survive the kind of compression he was looking at. And most disturbing of all, there were no bodies visible anywhere, despite the fact that no one could have walked away from this level of destruction. The SUV's license plate had been mangled beyond recognition, but Jake could make out enough letters to determine it was a Colorado registration. The vehicle appeared to be a late model Suburban or similar large SUV, the kind of vehicle that suburban families use for long road trips and hauling sports equipment. But this one told a story of terror and desperate flight that went far beyond a simple family vacation gone wrong. As Jake circled the wreckage, his flashlight revealed details that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The rear windows had been broken out from the inside, with safety glass scattered on the ground in a pattern that suggested someone had kicked or punched their way out after the crash. But more concerning were the streaks of what looked like blood on the broken glass edges and the small pieces of fabric caught on the jagged fragments. The SUV's interior was partially visible through the shattered windows, and what Jake could see made his throat tighten. Child safety seats. Multiple child safety seats, all empty, all showing signs of recent use. Scattered across the seats and floor were items that told the story of a family in flight: hastily packed bags, children's toys, snack foods, and what appeared to be a woman's purse with its contents spilled across the floor. Zeus had stopped his circling and was now staring intently at Jake, as if trying to communicate something crucial that human language couldn't express. The dog's eyes reflected the flashlight beam with an almost supernatural intensity, and his body language screamed urgency mixed with confusion. In all their years of partnership, Jake had learned to read Zeus's signals like a book, but tonight the bloodhound seemed to be speaking in a language Jake had never encountered. The radio's damaged loop suddenly changed, switching to what sounded like a news broadcast, though the words were distorted by static and repetition to understand. But Jake caught fragments that made his blood run cold: something about missing children, an Amber Alert, and a manhunt spanning multiple states. The broadcast faded back into the eternal loop of classical music, leaving Jake with more questions than answers and a growing certainty that they had stumbled into something far more complex than a simple traffic accident. Jake keyed his radio, but received only static in response. They were too deep in the canyon for his equipment to reach the repeaters. On the mountain peaks above, they were alone with whatever Zeus had discovered, and as Jake followed his partner toward the cluster of boulders where the dog's attention remained fixated, he couldn't shake the feeling that the most shocking revelations still lay ahead. The wind picked up, howling through the pine branches with a sound like voices crying in the wilderness, and Jake realized that the real mystery wasn't the crashed SUV or its missing occupants. It was what Zeus had found in the shadows beyond, something that had shaken the unflappable bloodhound to his very core. Jake's hands trembled as he approached the driver's side of the mangled SUV, his service weapon held at the ready despite the apparent absence of any immediate threat. The vehicle's door hung at an impossible angle, twisted metal groaning softly in the bitter wind as if the SUV itself were in pain. Steam continued to rise from beneath the crumpled hood, creating an otherworldly fog that seemed to part reluctantly before his flashlight beam. The acrid smell of coolant mixed with something else, something organic and metallic, that made Jake's stomach clench with dread. The driver's seat told a story of violence that was almost too horrific to comprehend. The deployed airbag was stained with blood, not just droplets or smears, but substantial amounts that suggested serious injury. The fabric was torn in several places, as if someone had clawed their way free from the inflated safety device with desperate urgency. But most disturbing of all, embedded in the airbag surface were what appeared to be small bloody handprints, their size suggesting they belonged to a child. Jake carefully documented the scene with his phone camera, knowing that every detail might prove crucial later. The steering wheel had been bent downward at an angle that seemed to defy the laws of physics, and the driver's seat itself had been pushed so far back that it nearly touched the rear bench. Either the driver had been exceptionally tall, or someone had adjusted the seat after the crash, perhaps to create more room for escape. Personal belongings scattered throughout the cabin painted a picture of a family in desperate flight. A woman's leather purse had burst open upon impact, spilling its contents across the passenger seat and floor. Jake could see a wallet with credit cards and cash still visible, car keys dangling from the ignition switch, and a cell phone with a spiderweb screen that somehow still showed the time, 3:52 a.m. The crash had happened less than an hour ago, which meant that whoever had been in this vehicle might still be alive somewhere in the frozen wilderness. Among the scattered items, Jake found something that made his pulse quicken: a prescription medication bottle made out to Maria Santos, Agent 34, for anxiety medication. The label showed it had been filled just 3 days ago at a pharmacy in Denver, over 200 miles away. But what caught Jake's attention wasn't the medication, it was the emergency contact information visible on an insurance card nearby. The policy holder was listed as Maria Santos, but the emergency contact was someone named Rebecca Morrison with a phone number that had a Colorado Springs area code. Zeus had abandoned his circling behavior and was now focused intently on the rear cargo area of the SUV, his massive head tilted as if listening to sounds that human ears couldn't detect. The bloodhound's body language had shifted again, displaying what Jake had learned to recognize as intense confusion mixed with protective instinct. Zeus kept looking back at Jake with an expression that seemed almost pleading, as if he were trying to communicate something vital that transcended the normal boundaries between human and canine understanding. The rear hatch of the SUV had been completely destroyed in the impact, leaving a gaping opening that looked like a metallic mouth, frozen in a scream. Jake aimed his flashlight through the opening and immediately saw why Zeus was so agitated. The cargo area had been converted into a makeshift living space, complete with blankets, pillows, and what appeared to be enough food and water supplies for several days. But this wasn't the hasty preparation of someone planning a camping trip. This was the careful organization of someone preparing to disappear. Sleeping bags were arranged in precise patterns, each one small enough to accommodate a child. Boxes of crackers, canned goods, and juice boxes were stacked with military precision along one side of the cargo area. Most telling of all, Jake found a hand-drawn map tucked under one of the pillows, showing a route from Denver through Colorado Springs to a location marked simply as Safe House, somewhere near the Wyoming border. But the cargo area held even more disturbing evidence. Jake's flashlight beam revealed scratches on the interior walls, fresh scratches that formed letters. Someone had used their fingernails or perhaps a piece of jewelry to carve words into the SUV's interior surfaces. The messages were crude, but readable. Help US. He's coming, and most chilling of all, tell Mama we love her. Jake's radio crackled with static, and for a moment he thought he might have regained contact with dispatch. Instead, what came through the speaker was a child's voice. Faint and distorted but unmistakably real. Is someone there? Please help us. We're so cold. The transmission lasted only seconds before dissolving back into static, but it was enough to send electric shock through Jake's nervous system. Zeus erupted into frantic barking, running in tight circles around an area roughly 30 feet from the SUV. The dog's behavior had crossed the line from agitated to genuinely distressed, and Jake realized that his partner had found something that challenged every instinct the bloodhound possessed. Zeus's nose never lied, but tonight it seemed to be leading them toward something that defied logical explanation. Jake followed Zeus to a cluster of large granite boulders, arranged in a natural semicircle. The area was sheltered from the wind, and the snow here was noticeably less deep than in the surrounding clearing. But what made Jake's blood freeze wasn't what he could see, it was what he could hear. From somewhere among the rocks came the faint but unmistakable sound of children's voices, speaking in whispers that seemed to carry an impossible distance through the thin mountain air. Are you an angel? Came a small voice that seemed to emanate from the rocks themselves. The lady said angels would come to help us if we were very quiet and very brave. Jake's flashlight beam swept frantically across the boulder formation, but revealed only shadows and snow-covered stone. The voices seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere. As if the mountain itself had learned to speak, Zeus had stopped barking and was now whimpering softly, his massive head swiveling back and forth as he tried to locate the source of sounds. That seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. Hello, Jake called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. I'm a police officer. If someone is out there, I'm here to help you. The response came immediately, but from a direction that made no sense directly beneath Jake's feet. We're in the special hiding place. A different child's voice explained with a matter-of-fact tone that only children could manage in extraordinary circumstances. The angel lady showed us how to stay warm until the good people came to find us. Jake looked down at the snow-covered ground beneath his boots, then at Zeus, whose expression mirrored his own complete bewilderment. They had found the missing occupants of the SUV, but in a way that challenged everything Jake thought he knew about survival, physics, and the mysterious ways that desperate people could seemingly vanish into thin air while remaining close enough to touch. Jake's hand shook as he dropped to his knees in the snow, pressing his ear against the frozen ground where the children's voices seemed to be originating. The earth beneath him felt solid as granite, but the voices were unmistakably real, not hallucinations brought on by cold and stress, but actual human children speaking from what appeared to be impossible depths below the surface. Zeus joined him, pawing frantically at a specific spot where the snow seemed slightly different in texture, his powerful claws scraping against something that definitely wasn't rock. Can you hear us better now? Came a small voice that sounded like it belonged to a girl no older than 6 or 7. We've been waiting so long, and it's getting really cold down here even with all the blankets the angel lady gave us. Jake's flashlight beam revealed what Zeus had discovered, a section of ground that wasn't ground at all, but rather an expertly camouflaged entrance to what appeared to be a natural cave system. The rocks Zeus had been circling were actually carefully arranged pieces of stone and timber designed to conceal an opening that would be invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. Whoever had created this hiding place possessed knowledge of the terrain that went far beyond casual familiarity. Working together, Jake and Zeus managed to move aside the camouflage covering, revealing a natural chimney in the rock formation that dropped down into darkness. The opening was roughly 4 feet in diameter, large enough for an adult to squeeze through, but small enough to remain hidden beneath the artificial rock covering. The engineering was sophisticated, with wooden supports and what appeared to be a ventilation system that allowed air circulation while maintaining concealment. Jake aimed his flashlight down the shaft and felt his heart stop. 15 feet below, in a natural cave that had been expanded and modified with human engineering, 3 small faces looked up at him with expressions of relief, terror, and exhaustion. The children appeared to range in age from approximately 4 to 8 years old, and they were very much alive. wrapped in sleeping bags and huddled around what appeared to be a battery-powered heating unit. "Are you the police officer the angel lady said would come?" asked the oldest child. A girl with dark hair and enormous brown eyes that reflected Jake's flashlight beam like mirrors. "She said we had to stay hidden until someone with a badge found us, and she made us promise not to come out for anyone else, no matter what." Jake's mind raced as he processed the implications. Someone this mysterious angel lady the children kept referencing had not only survived the catastrophic SUV crash, but had possessed the presence of mind and physical capability to move 3 children to this elaborate hiding place. The level of preparation suggested this wasn't a spontaneous decision made after the accident, but rather part of a carefully orchestrated plan that had been set in motion long before the SUV had ever left the highway. "My name is Officer Thompson," Jake called down to the children, keeping his voice calm and reassuring despite the surreal nature of the situation. "I'm here to help you, and I have my partner Zeus with me. He's a very good dog who helped us find you. Can you tell me your names?" "I'm Emma, and this is my little brother Carlos, and this is Sophia," the older girl replied with the careful politeness of a child who had been coached on how to interact with authority figures. "The angel lady said our mama sent her to keep us safe from the bad man, but then the car got broken, and she had to put us in the special hiding place." Jake's radio crackled to life with a burst of static, followed by a transmission that made his blood run cold. "All units, be advised, we have confirmation of child abduction in progress. Suspect is armed and considered extremely dangerous. 3 children, ages 4, 6, and 8, taken from Denver area. Suspect vehicle described as dark blue Suburban, Colorado plates." The transmission dissolved back into static, but Jake had heard enough to understand that the situation was far more complex than a simple traffic accident. Zeus had positioned himself at the edge of the cave opening, his body language protective and alert. The bloodhound's instincts were telling him that danger was still present, that whatever threat had caused this elaborate hide-and-seek game in the wilderness hadn't passed. Jake trusted his partner's judgment implicitly, and Zeus continued. Agitation suggested they weren't alone in these mountains. "Emma, can you tell me about the angel lady?" Jake asked, already formulating a rescue plan in his mind. The cave appeared to be warm and dry, suggesting it had been prepared well in advance as an emergency shelter. "What did she look like? And where did she go after she brought you here?" "She was really pretty, with blonde hair like a princess," Emma replied, her voice carrying the confidence of a child recounting a fairy tale. "She said she used to have little girls just like us, but the bad men took them away. So now she helps other little girls stay safe. She showed us how to use the heater and told us the special words to say if strangers came looking for us." The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a picture that defied Jake's understanding of criminal behavior. Either they were dealing with a kidnapper who had developed an elaborate form of Stockholm Syndrome, or something far more complex was unfolding an underground network designed to protect children from threats that the conventional justice system couldn't handle. "She went back up to fix the car so the bad man couldn't follow our tracks," Carlos added, his voice small and frightened. "But we heard really loud noises, like fireworks. And then she never came back down to get us." Jake felt eyes form in his stomach as he processed the child's description. Loud noises like fireworks in this context almost certainly meant gunshots, which suggested that the mysterious woman had encountered someone dangerous near the crash site. If she had been armed and had engaged in a firefight, it would explain the blood evidence at the SUV and the absence of any body near the wreckage. Zeus's ears suddenly perked up, and he began growling low in his throat, a sound Jake had learned to interpret as a warning of approaching danger. Someone or something was moving through the forest above them, and Zeus's acute hearing had detected the threat long before human senses could register it. Jake drew his service weapon and motioned for Zeus to take a protective position near the cave entrance. "Emma, I need you and the other children to stay very quiet for a few minutes," Jake whispered down into the cave. "Don't make any sounds until I tell you it's safe, okay?" The footsteps were closer now, crunching through the snow with the deliberate pace of someone searching for something specific. Jake clicked off his flashlight and listened to the approaching sounds, his finger resting lightly on his weapon's trigger. Zeus remained motionless beside him, every muscle tense for action, both of them understanding that whatever had driven 3 children into a hidden cave in the middle of a frozen wilderness was about to reveal itself in the darkness above. The footsteps stopped directly above the concealed cave entrance, and Jake held his breath as snow began falling through the darkness in small cascades. That suggested someone was moving carefully around their position. Zeus remained frozen in a perfect point stance. His ears swiveled forward and his lips pulled back in a silent snarl that revealed gleaming white fangs. The bloodhound's exceptional hearing was tracking movement that Jake couldn't detect, and his body language screamed imminent threat. Then, without warning, a woman's voice called out from the darkness above, not the harsh command of a pursuer, but the desperate whisper of someone in terrible pain. Please, if someone's there, I need help. The children, are they safe? Jake kept his weapon drawn, but clicked on his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the snow-covered clearing until it found the source of the voice. A woman in her early 30s sat propped against a fallen log roughly 50 feet from the cave entrance. Her blonde hair matted with blood, and her winter jacket torn and stained dark across the chest. She was clutching her right shoulder with her left hand, and even from this distance, Jake could see that she was losing the fight against shock and hypothermia. I'm Officer Thompson with the Colorado State Police, Jake called out, keeping his voice steady and professional while maintaining tactical awareness of his surroundings. Are you the person who brought the children here? Rebecca Morrison, she replied, her voice growing weaker with each word. I was trying to get them to safety. Their stepfather, Marcus Santos, he found us. I had to lead him away from the cave, but he shot me before I could circle back. Her words came in short bursts punctuated by visible puffs of breath. That showed she was fighting to stay conscious in the brutal cold. Jake's mind immediately began processing this new information against what he'd learned from the children and the evidence at the crash site. The SUV had been registered to Maria Santos, but the children were with Rebecca Morrison, suggesting a handoff had taken place somewhere between Denver and this remote canyon. The reference to Marcus Santos as a stepfather painted a picture of domestic violence that had escalated into something requiring extreme protective measures. Rebecca, I need you to stay awake and keep talking to me, Jake said, already moving toward her position while keeping Zeus' position to guard the cave entrance. Where is Marcus Santos now? Is he still in the area? I don't know, Rebecca gasped, and Jake could see that her lips were beginning to show the blue tinge of severe hypothermia. I heard him crashing through the trees after he shot me, but that was, God, I don't know how long ago, maybe an hour. The cold makes everything fuzzy. As Jake reached Rebecca's position, his flashlight revealed the extent of her injuries. The bullet had struck her right shoulder, and while it didn't appear to have hit any major arteries, she had lost significant blood. More immediately dangerous was her core body temperature. Her skin felt like ice even through her jacket, and her pupils were showing the dilation that indicated advancing hypothermia shock. Rebecca, I need to ask you some quick questions while I work on getting you warmed up, Jake said, pulling emergency blankets from his kit while maintaining awareness of their tactical situation. How do you know Maria Santos, and how did you end up with her children? Underground network, Rebecca whispered, her words slurring slightly as the cold affected her speech. Women helping women escape abusive situations. Maria called our hotline 3 days ago. Said Marcus had threatened to kill her and take the kids if she tried to leave him again. We arranged a handoff at a truck stop outside Denver. Jake's radio crackled with an incoming transmission that made his blood freeze. All units, be advised. Suspect Marcus Santos, now considered armed and extremely dangerous, has fired on law enforcement personnel. Last seen heading toward Highway 185. Search area. Approach with extreme caution. The transmission confirmed Jake's worst fears. Not only was the children's stepfather still hunting them, but he had already engaged law enforcement officers, which meant he was desperate enough to fire on police. Jake was now dealing with a man who had nothing left to lose and was willing to kill anyone who stood between him and his prey. The network has safe houses all through the mountain states, Rebecca continued, her voice growing more distant as shock deepened. I've been running it for 2 years, ever since my own daughter was murdered by her father after the courts gave him visitation rights. Despite his history of violence, the pieces of Rebecca's story began falling into place with horrible clarity. She wasn't a kidnapper or human trafficker, but rather a woman who had lost everything to domestic violence and had dedicated her life to preventing other families from suffering the same fate. The elaborate cave system, the careful planning, the willingness to risk her life for children she barely knew, it all made sense. In the context of someone who had watched the legal system failed to protect the innocent. Zeus suddenly lifted his head and released a low growl that Jake had learned to interpret as a warning of approaching human presence. The bloodhound's nose was detecting scents carried on the mountain wind. Someone moving through the forest in their direction, probably following the same path Jake and Zeus had used to reach the crash site. Rebecca, is there another way out of this area? Jake asked urgently, already knowing that moving her in her current condition would be extremely dangerous, but understanding that staying put might be fatal for all of them. There's an old mining trail about a quarter-mile east, she whispered, pointing with a trembling hand toward a gap between two large rock formations. Leads up to a Forest Service road, but I don't think I can make it that far. Jake made a tactical decision that went against every protocol in his training manual. Instead of calling for backup and waiting for assistance, he was going to have to extract 3 children and a critically wounded woman from a hostile environment while being hunted by an armed man who had already demonstrated his willingness to kill. Emma, Jake called down into the cave, keeping his voice calm despite the urgency of their situation. I need you and the other children to put on all your warm clothes and get ready to take a walk. We're going to help Rebecca, and then we're all going to go somewhere safe together. The sound of approaching footsteps was getting louder now, and Jake could hear someone calling out through the darkness, a man's voice, rough with anger and desperation, shouting names that made Rebecca's entire body tense with terror. Maria, I know you're out here somewhere. Bring me my kids, or I swear to God I'll burn down this entire mountain to find them. Jake drew his service weapon and prepared for the confrontation that would determine whether for lives would see another sunrise, knowing that Zeus was the only backup he could count on in a fight that was about to test every skill he'd learned in 12 years of law enforcement. Marcus Santos emerged from the tree line like a predator stalking wounded prey, his silhouette barely visible in the darkness, but unmistakably menacing. As he moved with the calculated precision of someone accustomed to hunting human beings, Jake could see the glint of metal in the man's right hand, a pistol held with the casual familiarity of someone who had used firearms to intimidate and control others throughout his life. Marcus was bigger than Jake had expected, easily 6'3", with the broad shoulders and thick build of someone who used physical intimidation as his primary tool of psychological warfare. I could smell the fear out here, Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the frozen clearing with the cruel confidence of a man who believed he held all the advantages. Maria, you stupid bitch, did you really think you could hide my property from me? Those kids belong to me, and I'm taking them home, whether you're breathing or not when this is over. Jake positioned himself between Marcus and the concealed cave entrance, using a large boulder as partial cover, while keeping his service weapon trained on the approaching threat. Rebecca had managed to crawl behind a fallen log, but she was fading fast from blood loss and hypothermia, her movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated as shock set in. Zeus remained in a perfect attack stance, his powerful muscles coiled like springs and his intelligent eyes locked onto Marcus, with the intense focus of a predator preparing to defend his pack. Marcus Santos, Jake called out, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he perfected over 12 years of law enforcement. This is Officer Thompson with the Colorado State Police. You're under arrest for child endangerment, domestic violence, and assault with a deadly weapon. Drop your weapon and place your hands behind your head. Marcus's response was a bark of cruel laughter that echoed off the canyon walls like the sound of breaking glass. You think I'm afraid of one cop and his mutt? I've been planning this for months, ever since that worthless wife of mine started getting ideas about leaving me. You have no idea what you've walked into, Officer Thompson. As Marcus continued his approach, Jake began to understand the true scope of what Rebecca's underground network had been fighting against. This wasn't a simple case of domestic violence that had escalated. Marcus Santos was a predator who had spent months methodically hunting his own family, tracking them across multiple states with the patience and determination of someone who viewed human beings as possessions to be reclaimed rather than people with the right to safety and freedom. The courts gave me custody rights, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the self-righteous tone of someone who had convinced himself that his violence was justified. Those kids are legally mine, and no liberal judge or bleeding heart social worker is going to keep me from what belongs to me. Maria learned that the hard way. The implication in Marcus's words hit Jake like a physical blow. Where is Maria Santos? He demanded, though he already feared he knew the answer from the satisfaction evident in Marcus's voice. "Let's just say she won't be interfering with my parental rights anymore," Marcus replied, and Jake felt his blood turn to ice as he realized they were dealing with a man who had already committed murder and had nothing left to lose. "Now, you can either step aside and let me collect my children, or you can join her in whatever hole she's rotting in." Rebecca managed to raise her head despite her weakening condition, her voice barely audible, but filled with desperate urgency. "Jake, the network, we documented everything. Photos, medical records, police reports that were ignored. It's all in my truck, parked on the Forest Service Road. Marcus has been escalating for months, threatening to kill anyone who tried to help Maria escape." Marcus heard Rebecca's words and turned his attention toward her hiding spot, his weapon swinging in her direction with casual murderous intent. "Rebecca Morrison, the famous Angel of Mercy, you cost me 6 months of hunting. But you can't say I didn't warn you what would happen if you interfered with my family." Jake realized with horrible clarity that Rebecca's underground network hadn't just been helping women escape abusive relationships. They had been documenting systematic failures of the legal system that allowed predators like Marcus to use custody laws as weapons against their victims. The careful preparation, the elaborate safe houses, the willingness to operate outside legal channels, it all made sense when viewed as a last resort against a system that consistently failed to protect the innocent. "The other families you helped escape," Jake said, keeping his weapon trained on Marcus while trying to buy time for backup to arrive. "How many others has he threatened?" "7 families in the last 2 years, Rebecca whispered, her voice growing weaker with each word. "Marcus has connections, dirty cops, corrupt judges, lawyers who specialize in helping abusers maintain control. The network was the only way to get victims to safety when the system failed them." Marcus's face twisted with rage as he processed Rebecca's words. "Those weren't victims. They were my property trying to steal themselves from me. Every single one of those families learned what happens when you try to run from Marcus Santos." The casual way Marcus spoke about human beings as property revealed the depth of his pathological need for control, and Jake began to understand why Rebecca had been willing to risk everything to protect Maria Santos and her children. They weren't dealing with a typical domestic violence case. Marcus was a serial predator who had spent years perfecting his ability to use legal systems and law enforcement connections to hunt families who tried to escape his control. Zaius's growl deepened to a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the frozen ground, and Jake could see that his partner was reading threat signals that went beyond normal criminal behavior. The bloodhound's instincts were telling him that Marcus Santos represented a level of danger that required extreme measures to neutralize. "Those kids down there," Marcus said, gesturing toward the cave entrance with his weapon. "They're going to learn the same lesson their mother learned. Nobody runs from me. Nobody hides from me, and nobody, not cops, not judges, not underground. Networks keeps me from what's mine." Jake realized that Marcus had known about the cave system all along, had probably been tracking Rebecca's network for months, learning their methods and identifying their safe locations. The crash hadn't been an accident, it had been the culmination of a carefully planned hunt that had finally cornered his prey in a location where no one could hear the screams. As Marcus raised his weapon with the clear intent to eliminate the only witness to his crimes, Jake made a decision that would either save for lives or end his own. He whistled the attack command that would unleash Zaius's full protective fury, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether justice would prevail or whether a monster would claim for more victims in his reign of terror. Zeus launched himself through the darkness like a missile of fur and muscle, his 110-pound frame covering the distance to Marcus Santos in less than 3 seconds. The bloodhound's attack was devastatingly precise. He struck Marcus' center mass, driving the larger man backward into a pine tree with bone-crushing force. Marcus's weapon discharged harmlessly into the air as Zaius's powerful jaws clamped down on his gun arm, the dog's training taking over as he neutralized the immediate threat with surgical efficiency. Jake rushed forward with his weapon drawn, but the fight was already over. Marcus lay pinned beneath Zaius's weight, his right arm rendered useless by the bloodhound's grip, his face contorted with pain and the dawning realization that his reign of terror had finally met its match. The predator who had spent months hunting innocent families had been brought down by the very thing he had dismissed as just another obstacle, the unwavering loyalty of a police dog trained to protect the innocent. "Zeus, hold," Jake commanded, and the bloodhound maintained his grip while Jake secured Marcus's weapon and applied handcuffs. Even restrained, Marcus continued to struggle and curse, his rage evident as he realized his carefully planned hunt had been destroyed by forces he had never considered a serious threat. With the immediate danger neutralized, Jake turned his attention to Rebecca, who was fading rapidly from her injuries. Her pulse was weak and thready, her skin taking on the waxy pallor of someone losing the fight against shock and hypothermia. Jake wrapped her in emergency blankets and activated a chemical heat pack, but he knew she needed immediate medical attention that was hours away in these remote mountains. The children, Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. Are they safe? They're safe, Jake assured her, already moving toward the concealed cave entrance. Emma, Carlos, Sophia, it's Officer Thompson. The bad man can't hurt you anymore. We're going to get you out of there and somewhere warm. The children emerged from their underground sanctuary like survivors of an impossible ordeal, their small faces reflecting a mixture of terror, exhaustion, and the kind of premature wisdom that comes from witnessing horrors no child should ever experience. Emma, the oldest, immediately took charge of her younger companions, helping them navigate the rope ladder Jake had secured to the cave entrance. As Jake gathered the children around him, his radio finally crackled to life with incoming transmissions from the backup units that had been fighting through the treacherous mountain roads. Unit 47, this is dispatch. Multiple units responding to your location. Search and rescue teams are en route with medical personnel. But Jake's attention was drawn to something else. Rebecca had managed to whisper before losing consciousness coordinates to a location where they would find evidence that would expose the full scope of Marcus's crimes and the network that had been fighting to stop him. Following her directions, Jake and Zeus made their way to Rebecca's truck, parked on a hidden Forest Service road about half a mile from the crash site. Inside the vehicle, Jake discovered what amounted to a mobile command center for an underground railroad that had been operating across 5 states. File cabinets contained detailed documentation on dozens of domestic violence cases, photographs of injuries that law enforcement had ignored, and recordings of death threats that judges had dismissed as family disputes. Most damning of all were the financial records, showing payments Marcus had made to specific law enforcement officers and court officials, a paper trail that would ultimately expose a corruption network that had enabled predators to hunt their victims with virtual impunity. The files told stories of systematic failure that went far beyond individual cases of domestic violence. Rebecca's network had documented patterns of corruption that allowed men like Marcus to use legal systems as weapons, turning custody battles into hunting licenses and restraining orders into meaningless pieces of paper. The underground network had been forced to exist because the official systems designed to protect families had been compromised from within. Among the files, Jake found Rebecca's personal story newspaper clippings about her daughter's murder, court documents showing how her ex-husband had been awarded custody despite a history of violence, and medical examiner reports that detailed injuries consisted with prolonged torture. Rebecca Morrison hadn't become an angel of mercy out of abstract compassion. She had been forged in the crucible of personal tragedy and transformed into someone willing to risk everything to prevent other families from suffering her fate. As medical helicopters finally arrived to evacuate Rebecca and transport the children to safety, Jake made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Hidden in a secret compartment of Rebecca's truck were video recordings of Marcus Santos, describing in detail how he had murdered Maria Santos and disposed of her body. The recordings had been made using hidden cameras and microphones that Rebecca's network had placed in locations where Marcus felt safe enough to boast about his crimes. The videos revealed a level of premeditation and sadistic pleasure that went far beyond typical domestic violence. Marcus had recorded himself describing how he had hunted Maria across 3 states, how he had used his connections to track her movements, and how he had finally cornered her in a remote location where her screams couldn't be heard. Most chilling of all were his detailed descriptions of what he planned to do to anyone who tried to help his property escape from him. 6 months later, the trials that followed would expose a corruption network that reached into law enforcement agencies, court systems, and social service organizations across multiple states. Marcus Santos was convicted of first-degree murder and received a life sentence, without possibility of parole. But the real victory was the systematic dismantling of the network that had enabled his crimes. Rebecca Morrison survived her gunshot wound but would carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of her life. The underground network she had built was eventually legitimized and transformed into a federally funded program that helped domestic violence victims escape abusive situations through legal channels. The program was named the Rebecca Morrison Foundation, and it became a model for similar operations across the country. The three children, Emma, Carlos, and Sophia, were placed with Maria Santos' sister in California, where they began the long process of healing from trauma that would affect them for years to come. But they were alive, and they were safe, and they would grow up knowing that there were people in the world willing to risk everything to protect the innocent. Jake returned to patrol duty, but he never forgot the lesson he had learned in that frozen canyon, that sometimes the most heroic acts are performed by people the world never hears about, and that true justice often requires ordinary individuals to make extraordinary sacrifices for strangers they barely know. Zeus continued his career in search and rescue, but that night in the mountains had changed him too. As if the bloodhound understood that he had participated in something larger than a routine police operation, the crash site became a memorial to Maria Santos and the other victims of domestic violence whose stories had been ignored by systems designed to protect them. And in the cave, where three children had waited in darkness for angels to find them, visitors would discover a simple plaque bearing Rebecca Morrison's words. Sometimes the only thing standing between innocent people and monsters is someone willing to step into the darkness and become a light.